I'm almost as embarrassed by the word spirituality as every other atheist. It's not, I'm not comfortable with my use of it. The problem is, and this is a problem you almost never encounter in English, we just don't have a good word for this domain. We just do not have a good word for the project of taking seriously the notion that you could become like Jesus or become like the Buddha or become someone who inhabits the far end of the positive side of the continuum of human psychology and human well-being. So while I argue that we have to get out of the religion business and the doctrines that have framed most people's discussion of these experiences are unwarranted, as I've always said, there is no alternative term for the efforts that people can make through meditation or psychedelics or some other means to really transform their consciousness and have insight into its intrinsic selfless nature. And it's inconvenient, but I feel like the other words that are available are even spookier. So for better or worse, I'm trying to rehabilitate the word spirituality.
Sam Harris says he wants to rehabilitate the word spirituality. Why does it need rehabilitation? I would say that it is because Western culture has traditionally come to identify spirituality with religion, so atheists are perceived as having no spirituality. But also, part of it is the fault of the atheists themselves, who think that skepticism means that you should reject anything that can't be proven, and thus any kind of spirituality. This, I believe, is the cause of the reluctance Harris displays when talking about it. I think that is quite tragic, because a life that does not have a spiritual dimension is pretty impoverished. Religion is actually only one of several main ways in which human spirituality expresses itself, and there's no reason for secular people to reject all of them. In this video we shall discuss these types of spirituality, and how they can enrich our lives. First, let's define what spirituality is. There is no clear definition to this concept, and it is understood differently by different people, but I will attempt to provide a definition of my own. My answer is that a spiritual experience is an experience in which we feel we transcend ourselves, become part of something that is bigger than us. A spiritual life is a way of life that revolves around these experiences, and attempts to have them as much as possible. But I think it is more than that. A spiritual life also needs to have meaning. In my video The Meaning and Purpose of Life, I defined an action that makes your life meaningful as an action that demands of you to employ your spiritual powers, while aimed at a goal that will make your world better. I did not really define in that video what I mean when I say spiritual powers, so in this video I will try to be more specific. So when we discuss the different ways in which human spirituality expresses itself, I will ask A. What spiritual powers it demands of you to employ, and B. How does it purport to make your world better? Let's begin with religion. Religion is basically about believing that there is a bigger power controlling your life and this world. There is a higher design that we all belong to, a higher order, and when we willingly become part of this order, we transcend our own self and become part of something bigger. The main spiritual power employed here is the ability of people to commit themselves to something greater. You don't need religion to employ this ability. There are things in the secular world that are bigger than you and that you can commit to. But religion turns this ability into the thing around which your spiritual life revolves. And the religious person also believes that by becoming part of this divine order and design, they are helping to bring salvation to the world, and thus making it better. The second form of spirituality that we shall discuss is science. Science is about exploring the universe and finding rules that govern it. It demands of the scientist to employ spiritual powers like reason, inventiveness, and courage. The transcendence is achieved when you feel like you figured out the natural law that governs the thing that you explore, and thus transcended previous human knowledge, and achieved mastery over something that heretofore had mastery over you. Through science we also explore and conquer new worlds, transcend the boundaries of our old world. And, of course, science benefits humanity in many ways, and thus makes the world better. Now science is reductionist. It limits itself to known facts and to certain acceptable methods, and builds its understanding of the world bit by bit. If you want to take a holistic approach, you can go with the third type of spirituality, which is philosophy. In philosophy, your thought is unbound, and tries to come up with a theory that explains everything. Like religion, it tries to find the order behind reality, But while religion believes this order is given to us through divine revelation, philosophy relies on the human mind alone. Using spiritual powers like reason, creativity, and intuition, the philosopher tries to find the order that rules everything, and thus transcend the everyday world. And the good philosophical theory can then be translated into the practical level as well, both in the personal sense, where it can help you organize your life better, and in the universal sense, where it can help us organize society better, and create a better world. Another field of human spirituality is math. The ability to do math is a spiritual power, and with math you transcend our world that is ruled by ambiguity and chance, and dwell in a realm that is a lot more pure and precise. And you help make the world better because mathematical findings are then used by scientists and philosophers when they form their theories. A fifth type of spirituality is art. Art is different from the previous three types in that it is not based on rationality. Using powers like creativity, talent, and skill, the artist transcends the realm of rationality and creates something that moves us with its beauty and emotional power. We cannot rationally explain why an art piece affects us in such a way, but we know that we achieve transcendence by experiencing it. Art, then, makes our world better by adding beauty to it, but it benefits us in another way as well. When we try to figure out why an art piece has such an effect on us, we learn more about ourselves, and as a result, we can devise a better world. Then there is mysticism. The main experience of mysticism is the feeling of oneness with the world, or oneness with God. The idea is that our rationality actually detaches us from the world, so we must use our spiritual powers, and the ability to have a mystical experience is a power of the human spirit, to transcend this divide and achieve unity. Mystical experiences can be found in religion and in art, but those who choose a mystical way of life turn these experiences into the core of their spirituality. And they also believe that our detachment from the oneness is what causes divisions and strife, so overcoming it makes the world better. Finally, the seventh form of spirituality I'll talk about is sports. By that I mean not just competitive sports, but also physical challenges like mountain climbing. Essentially, any physical activity that demands of you to triumph over a difficult challenge is an activity that gets you to employ spiritual powers like willpower, courage, competitiveness, and skill. When you manage to overcome a challenge, you achieve transcendence. And how does it make our world better? Well, let's remember that many sports were born as replacements for forms of fighting. It transforms a violent activity into a fun activity, and helps to make our world more peaceful and enjoyable. Those are the different types of human spirituality that I can think of. Note that each of them uses some spiritual powers to transcend other parts of our psyche, which they deem unspiritual. While philosophy, math, and science use rational powers to transcend the irrational, art, mysticism, and religion use irrational powers to transcend the rational. While math and mysticism want to transcend the physical world, science and sports connect us to it. While science, math, religion, and sport want to make rules that transcend disorder, philosophy, art, and mysticism want to transcend the existing order. And so forth. That is why, even though every one of them can be the basis of a rich and happy existence, it is better to live your life by more than one of them. This will develop your different spiritual powers, and also make you aware of the limits of each form of spirituality, and help you to not be bound by them. I, for instance, find my spirituality in philosophy and art, and enjoy the tension between them. How do you choose your own type of spirituality? Well, you should go by your own intuitions, see what gives you the greatest joy. But even with the types of spirituality that you do not connect with, you should at least be open to them. Try to understand what they give to other people. Understanding one's spiritual basis is a very important step toward understanding the world. So the thing I wanted to stress in this video is that we should get over the tendency to associate spirituality with religion and mysticism. This is particularly relevant to the skeptic community. A lot of skeptics reject spirituality, because they see it as committing to something that cannot be explained rationally. And by that, they are diminishing their lives. So consider this: if something enriches your life with joyful experiences, then it is rational to commit to it. You just have to maintain your critical thinking, and not fall into the trap of thinking it represents the one and only truth. Now you may be wondering, if all these ways are legitimate, how can we come to agreements, the kind of agreements that are necessary to maintain a society? These different types of spirituality have the different ways to define what is true. So how do we decide between them? Well, the answer is that when we get to decide what is objectively true, we must use science. For an explanation on why that is, check out this video. A more interesting question is whether it is possible to hold all of these types of spirituality and experience what each of them has to give. Well, it may have been possible in the past, when they were still interwoven with each other. Nowadays, they are too separated, too much at odds with each other, for that to be possible. But I started pondering on this question again lately, when I read a latter-day book that almost lives up to this ideal. It would be more accurate to say that I reread it, because it is a book I've read and loved as a teenager. I am talking about Douglas Hofstadter's 1979 masterpiece, Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid. The reason I read it again is that it recently came out in a Hebrew translation. I was very skeptical about the possibility that this book could ever be translated, but the translators did a fantastic job. If you are a Hebrew speaker and intimidated by English books, you should definitely get it. It loses very little in the translation, and maintains its magic. Reading it again got me ruminating a bit about spirituality, about the different spiritual ways in which this book can be experienced, so I thought I'd share it with you. The book is mainly a mathematical book, and it tries to answer the question of how artificial intelligence can be created. It leads the reader through mathematical ideas, trying to get you to think about the nature of intelligence. But the question is intelligence purely mathematical? If intelligence can be fully reduced to mathematics and logic, then we should be able to design computers that have intelligence. If there is something more, then we have to figure out how to create it, which means that maybe we need to inquire other fields, other forms of spirituality. The idea that everything can be reduced to mathematics was first put forth by the Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who lived in the 6th century BC. Like the other early Greek philosophers, Pythagoras was occupied with the question of the foundation of the universe, the thing from which everything is made. While other philosophers suggested mainly elements like water, air, and fire, Pythagoras claimed that everything is made of numbers. Pythagoras and his followers were the ones who realized that there are mathematical relations between things in nature. For instance, they were the first to realize that a plucked string will produce the same note as a string twice its size, only an octave higher, and thus they laid the ground for the Western musical scale and the harmonies it can create. They were basically a religious cult, which sought to mystically connect to the mathematical nature of the universe. This is one example for what I meant when I said that in the past, the different spiritualities I mentioned were intertwined. In the Pythagorean cult, we find religion, math, science, art, mysticism and philosophy all tied together. In the Middle Ages, the idea that nature is governed by mathematical rules took a back seat. Nature was generally regarded as chaotic, and the aspiration was to transcend above it and be part of the divine order. The New Age saw a revival of the old Pythagorean idea, which reached its peak in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Enlightenment era. The philosophers of Enlightenment claimed that God created the universe on mathematical and logical principles, which the human mind can decipher. These claims were bolstered by the findings of science, especially after Isaac Newton showed that the laws of motion can be defined in mathematical equations. Math had once again regained a spiritual dimension, believed to be a way to connect to God. Newton himself made significant contributions to math, and was one of the co-creators of calculus. The other co-creator was the German philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who lived between the years 1646 and 1716. Leibniz is said to have been the last person to hold all the knowledge of his time. In other words, this was the last time in history in which all accumulated human knowledge could be contained in one human mind, and that mind was the mind of Leibniz. Because of that, beyond being one of the greatest philosophers and mathematicians of all time, Leibniz's thought also pertained to theology, science and art. Those fields were still intertwined enough for his thought to be relevant to all of them. On music, Leibniz said that it is a hidden arithmetic exercise of the soul, which does not know that it is counting. In other words, music has a mathematical nature, which most of its listeners are not aware of, but the fact that they gain pleasure from listening to it attests to the mathematical nature of their own human soul. And it is no coincidence that in Leibniz's time there lived the greatest musician to ever explore the mathematical side of music, Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was 4 decades younger than Leibniz, but he belonged to the same time, the time that believed God created the universe of perfect rational order, and made our minds part of that order. So math and religion go hand in hand in his art, and he created some of the most celebrated religious music of all time, and definitely the most intriguingly mathematical music. Many of his pieces are like mathematical riddles, riddles that create tension in the listener's mind, riddles that need to be solved. But even if you don't understand the math behind the music, they can still be enjoyable to listen to. Around the end of the 18th century, this perfect picture of the world began to shatter. Western thinkers started to have increasing doubts about the existence of God, about the idea that the universe is governed by a purely rational order, and about the idea that the human mind can fully decipher its secrets. So the worlds of science, religion, math and art started to drift away from each other. Math was no longer regarded as the deepest expression of human spirituality, and art shifted its focus to other spiritual faculties. And yet, there were still artists whose work revolved around math and logic. One of them was the British mathematician and logician Lewis Carroll, who dressed up logical conundrums in wonderfully whimsical garments of poetry and literature, as we find in Alice in Wonderland, his most famous work. Another is the Dutch painter M.C. Escher, whose brilliant paintings play tricks on the human mind, forcing it to deal with visual paradoxes. Math continues to be part of the Western spirit, and the works of these artists remind us of it. Douglas Hofstadter is an American professor of cognitive science, with degrees in mathematics and physics. His book focuses on the Austrian mathematician Kurt Gödel, who devised a system that uses numbers to express sentences of number theory, thus making math self-referential. And he showed that when math becomes self-referential, in the way that Bach's and Escher's works often are, it loses its perfection and runs into the same paradoxes and vague areas that human thought runs into. This resemblance between the works of Gödel, Escher and Bach prompted Hofstadter to write a book that explores the spiritual side of mathematics, but it is Lewis Carroll who is the inspiration to his writing style. Particularly, a dialogue in which Carroll borrows two characters that appear in one of Zeno's paradoxes, Achilles and the tortoise. The book is built around Carroll-style dialogues between Achilles, the tortoise and sometimes other fun characters, and after every dialogue there's a discussion that employs the art of Bach, Escher and others to explain concepts of advanced mathematics, eventually leading to a discussion on the budding field of artificial intelligence. It is a wonderland of mathematical beauty. I was considered a bit of a mathematical prodigy when I was a boy, but math just didn't do it for me. When I read this book for the first time, it wasn't the math that enthralled me, but the philosophy. It's one of those books that can provide you with the kind of spiritual journey that only philosophy can provide. Just soaring into the realm of ideas, and feeling like your world is expanding with every new idea. It totally blew my mind, and was one of the books that inspired me to get into this field. The book can of course be experienced in the artistic sense as well, not only because it helps you appreciate the genius of Bach, Escher, Carroll and others, but also because it is a masterpiece in and of itself. Since I am not so much into math, I am not a big fan of these artists, and the book doesn't move me like other art pieces might, but it is still a delight. I suppose you can experience this book in the religious sense as well. A lot of it deals with different levels, trying to find the higher design behind things. Just like Bach uses mathematical designs to create music that generates sublime religious transcendence, so can this book make you feel like you connect to some of the higher designs that construct your world. If you are religious, give it a try. But another thing that it shows is that higher designs can be created from below. Simple mathematical equations, when repeated enough times, can result in the formation of grand elaborate structures, which seem at first glance to have been the vision of an intelligent designer. So this book can be experienced on the scientific level as well. It doesn't only show the math at the basis of computer science, but also of some physical and biological phenomena. The field of artificial intelligence has of course advanced leaps and bounds since the book was published, but I would still recommend it to anyone interested in the field. Actually, I would recommend it to any scientist, as it may help you appreciate the spirituality of science. At some points, when math seems to be insufficient to explain certain things, Hofstadter resorts to mysticism for help, mainly Zen Buddhism. I wouldn't call the book mystical, but mysticism is there to remind us of the boundaries of the other forms of spirituality, occupying a place that they cannot reach. What about sports? Is it represented in the book? Well, the dialogues contain a lot of competitive moments, in which the characters push each other to come up with new ideas. But that's not physical sports, and you can't expect physicality from a book. However, let's remember that the two main characters, Achilles and the tortoise, come to us from a story about a foot race. In Lewis Carroll's version, they actually carry out that race, and prove Zeno wrong. Well, not exactly, because Zeno's claim was that the physical world is imaginary, so you can't use any physical evidence to refute him. But it serves to remind us thinkers that if we actually go out and do physical activity, we realize what a profound effect it has on our spiritual world. So any claim that the physical world doesn't exist, or that it has no connection to our spirituality, is put to shame. Once again, it teaches us that our spirituality cannot be contained in just one form. So this is a rare case of a modern book that can be experienced through all the different spiritual perspectives, and shifts between them. I doubt Hofstadter thought about it when he wrote it, but I happened to be reading it just as I was pondering the question of spirituality, so this is how I experienced it. I hope you found this discussion interesting, and I hope it helped you realize that spirituality is not something that belongs to religion alone, but that it is all around us, in many forms. Just think about how much spirituality went through creating the device you are using to watch this video, how much science, math, philosophy and art are manifested in its circuits. And if you haven't already, read the other Escher Bach. It will surely open your mind to think new thoughts, wonder what exactly is consciousness, or sentience, or awareness, or beauty, and what is spirituality.